my name is Jenna Hostetler, and welcome back to our virtual summit, Managing IBS, and your suffering, reduce your stress, and get answers. We're going to take a bit of a turn today and discuss inflammation with Dr. Dani Hommer. Dani has quite the background of dealing with her own gut problems, inflammatory conditions, and physical injuries, so I'm really excited to learn more about how she helps her patients overcome similar situations. Dani, it's so good to have you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and hopefully demystify some of the things that people have been dealing with and the things that I struggled with through, by myself through a lot of years too. Thankfully, I had a foundation of science, but still a lot of things weren't discussed going through my formal education.
Yeah, and inflammation is super interesting to me, so I'm excited. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is inflammation and why do we care if we have too much of it?
So first of all, inflammation is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing in the short term. And the problem with inflammation is when it becomes chronic. And that's really what we're seeing across the board in society, especially in America, is just this overwhelming chronic inflammation that continues to kind of like eat away at a lot of processes in our body and creates a lot of these chronic lifestyle related conditions. So inflammation itself is actually a chemical response by the immune system to help detoxify, repair, and protect tissues after damage or really any form of stress has kind of like stressed the tissue too much. The body throws this out, kind of like to protect it, wall it off. And the best example I can think of this is when people roll their ankle. They understand, like, they can see the inflammation, the redness, and like they can't step on it. And they're like, okay, that's inflammation. And that's one of those things where in the acute, it's really good because that actually helps heal the rolled ankle from the injury. But the problem is that we can't see a lot of this chronic underlying organ-based inflammation because you can't see it. And so we don't really know how to pinpoint it or understand if it's actually beneficial. So the most common stressors that I see in our body are going to be nutrition and lifestyle. It's like sleep, hydration, movement, emotional, and that can be anything from like childhood trauma and adverse childhood experiences, which a lot of people have, and they kind of carry with them to adulthood. And they don't even realize how much that's perpetuating some of this. It can be relationship stress. It can be financial stress, work stress. So there's a lot of things in that, like emotional stress, that I think that especially in the current world where we're just bombarded with like phones dinging and schedules and all this stuff, we don't even realize how much that's actually affecting us. And then the third one is going to be like these hidden infections or internal imbalances. And basically the first two kind of sets up that like insidious, covert, not really understanding what's going on. And that third layer is kind of what keeps us stuck. As far as like people are like, okay, I'm eating better, I'm getting more sleep, I'm doing all the right things, and I still like I feel better, but I don't feel 100%. And that's when you have to keep digging and diving deeper. And so that's one of the things that I realized my own self is that, okay, I had to fix these things in my lifestyle. And then when I did that, I was still frustrated because I was like eating Whole30, managing my stress by doing meditation, working out, drinking enough water, doing all these things. And I'm like, man, I just feel like I have to be perfect with my diet to still feel good. And that's really what continued to like make me dive deeper into this, is that I just didn't have that flexibility. And I think a lot of people feel stuck in that, where they kind of like feel stuck between like, I'm doing the right things and I still don't feel good. I'm trying way harder than, my friend Sally, and Sally can go out and party and eat whatever she wants and not exercise, and she doesn't feel like I do, but I'm over here being perfect and I still feel like crap. Like, why is that? And that's one of those things where it's a deeper level of healing and a deeper level of understanding. But I think that people have a lot more control than they think they do, as far as controlling a lot of this lifestyle predicated inflammation. So that's
Wow,
the biggest
yeah,
thing.
so super interesting. Some things I kind of want to pick your brain about.
Yeah.
So, okay, so inflammation is there to protect us. It's there, to fix things when they go wrong. So does that mean if someone is suffering with chronic inflammation, is it because they are continuously giving their body things that it needs to fight with, as far as like all constant input of stress, of bad food, like there's always things that it needs to work on because it never gets a break to just kind of chill?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this because I like this. I just thought of this when I was preparing a little bit today. is that our body's always trying to find that homeostasis. And so I think of it kind of like an air conditioner or furnace, wherever, whatever climate you're in. Let's say like if you are in Florida and you're trying to keep it cool in there, and so you have the AC cranked. Well, if you leave the door open, your AC is going to go and go and go and go and go, and it's eventually going to blow out. Same thing if you live like, in Canada and it's the middle of winter and you're like, I got my heat on, but I'm going to leave the door open and I'm going to just like keep cranking my heater. It's the same thing that goes on in our body. Basically, when you keep the body like in that constant state of trying to find that homeostasis, which is, what our thermostats do, is that they try to regulate wherever you want the temperature to be. And that's the problem, is that our bodies are trying to do that, but they aren't equipped with the tools, or we keep throwing insults at them and they're not able to kind of catch up or get back to that homeostasis. And that's another reason why a lot of us can get away with things in our, teens, 20s, maybe even 30s. And then when we start to get in our 30s, 40s, and even, sadly, I'm finding a lot of, I would work with women specifically in their 20s are getting, to these problems that I hadn't seen until, the last couple of years. It's getting younger and younger, unfortunately. And that just shows how much we're being bombarded with from all these stressors.
Super duper interesting. So, and this, you kind of already touched on the second question. So widespread inflammation, once you fix it, once you get things back down to how they should be, I mean, are you good, or is it like always a constant battle to keep it where it should be?
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely gonna be a constant battle just because of the world we're living in. And that's the problem, a lot of people think like, does organic matter? Does like my air quality matter? And it all matters. And it's kind of like another like great analogy that I like. I'm a very visual person, so I like to give people those kind of like visuals in their head. Is like a bucket. So we have a bucket that gets filled up with this inflammation essentially, and then it will start to seep over. And then that's when you have these symptoms that are overt, that your body's like, hey, pay attention. And that's the problem, is that this bucket usually is just going to fill up over time, slowly, 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 slowly. And then it kind of tips over. And then when the tip over comes, you're kind of like, wait, I didn't do anything serious. Like there wasn't that one thing. And that's the problem, that we're always looking for that one thing. But it's more of this gradual, you know, process over time that just keeps piling up, and then eventually has to boil over or flow over. And then that's when we get kind of feel stuck with that. But the good thing is that you can get your bucket down, so you only have this much inflammation sitting in there, and then you can go out, eat something that you probably know you shouldn't. Like we all like to have indulgences. I'm a big believer in like 80-20 for most people. Obviously, you have like, gluten, like a gluten sensitivity that's like overt, like you run to the bathroom. To me, that wouldn't be worth it. But some people can get by, having some of these things that we know that are inflammatory. And if you have enough space in your bucket, you won't feel so bad. So the cool thing is that once you get to a certain point of healing and a good place, you can have some more of that flexibility. And that's where I was saying, like before, I felt like I was stuck against this wall, because I was like, man, if I go off course at all with my diet, with stress, movement, I feel like I get slammed back into the wall. And I'm like, I don't want to be like that. And so going through and doing a lot of these practices consistently and really healing my gut was the deepest layer for me. Has given me that flexibility where I can do a lot more and not pay the price of it.
Yeah, it's almost like, doing just enough to get by in the moment versus really, really working on it so that you're not always
Yes.
constantly thinking about it.
Yeah.
So how does inflammation then play a part in gut health? And is it one and the same? Does one cause the other? How does that work?
So I think it's a little like, when you first asked this question, I thought about it. I was like, oh, it's kind of like chicken or egg. Like, I don't know. But once I started to think about it, unless you're born with some kind of anatomical, genetic, predisposition where you have like a gut lining issue, or there's something going on, even like in utero, I guess if you're exposed to certain chemicals or something like that. I don't do a lot of in utero stuff, but there's always going to be those 10 percenters, I'll call them, where you're just not set up for a favorable outcome. But I think a lot of this comes back to that inflammation that we get from the external environment. And that can even be like an in utero thing, like where, your mom potentially came into contact with a chemical that she didn't even realize was, not going to be the most beneficial. That's an environmental stressor. And so if you look at lifestyle and environment and the stressors, like, the emotional, mental stressors, I think that's really what sets us up. And then the gut kind of comes next. And one of the things that that I've learned, which I really didn't understand in the beginning when I kind of started on this eczema journey, when I started getting eczema 6 or 7, maybe 8 years ago, I was like, where did this come from? I kind of felt that same way where I was like, I've never had eczema before. I've never had this problem. You know, a lot of people experience eczema in their childhood. And I was just so frustrated because I was like, this just happened overnight for me, it felt like. And that's actually what led me down this path where I was like, okay, I understand inflammation or, you know, eczema is inflammatory. Okay, so where is the inflammation coming from? And like I went through this whole process like anyone else would do, and it was so confusing. And I started learning more about gut health. And the reason why gut health and immune system and the immune system are so integrated is because they literally are. So if you think about our gut lining, you have the lumen, or where like the food's hanging out, and that's where like stuff is passing through. And then your first layer is going to be your commensals or your normal bacteria, and they're going to reside in the mucus layer. And you actually have some immune system like little guys in there that are kind of like checking things out and seeing if things are safe or not. And so it's that mucus layer, you can think of it kind of like snot, kind of like the inside of your mouth, but like a lot more delicate is how I think about it. But it's supposed to be squishy and healthy, and it's able to kind of take that buffer. And like I said, your bacteria, your normal bacteria in your gut are going to hang out in there. And that's going to be your first immune system. So it's going to be like checking out things and saying, can you come through? Can you not? And if that gets depleted from lifestyle, you know, prescription medications, processed foods, stress, lack of sleep, all that stuff contributes to it. Then you're going to be down to your epithelial layer, which is where your tight junctions exist. So people have probably heard of leaky gut. And that's basically like you have these little like brick like looking things, and they're supposed to be tight. And what happens over time is that they'll start to open up, and then they let more stuff through. So if you don't have you have like an imbalance in your gut bacteria, that mucus layer is not doing healthy. Then if you have these open junctions, stuff gets through. And on that bottom layer is your gullet, or your immune system that's based in your gut. And it's going to start coming into contact with everything. So that's why we have these layers in our gut, and why it's so important to keep that healthy, because you basically expose your immune system in the gullet, and that makes up 78% of our entire immune system in our body. So then you can start to see, okay, so if my gut's not healthy, my immune system is just going to come into contact with more stuff, and it's going to, you know, understandably be reactive, because it's supposed to be like our defender. And if everything else, you know, the walls are crumbling in front of it, it's going to kind of freak out and be like, oh my God, I don't want gluten. I don't want eggs. I don't want dairy. I can't do this, you know, and you're going to start reacting to everything, versus having this nice little, I don't know, army in front of the immune system that kind of selectively decides what can come in contact with that. Does that help?
That's this really, really good visual. So,
Good.
yeah. So, I guess also another way to think of that is stuff is getting through your gut that should not be. You know, it's not getting broken down all the way. It's not, you know, getting broken down into those individual nutrients into everything as it should be. So it passes through, and your immune system, your body's like, what the heck is this big solid piece of whatever? I'm gonna
Yeah.
react to it because it should not be right here. So it's not that you can't
Yep.
eat an apple, it's that that apple should not have gotten through and
Yep.
created a reaction.
And
So
that's
how
why
do
food
you,
sensitivities are, no, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so how do you tighten things back up? How do you get those layers back up to how they should be?
Well, I think the first layer is going to be lifestyle. Like that's a problem, or you know, that I was running into, is that I was helping a lot of people, giving them the right supplements, but like they didn't want to do the work. And so I started screening people a lot better, where I was just like, listen, if we don't get the foundational stuff down, and we're not able to kind of like tighten things up and, you know, give you the lifestyle, give you the foundation to fix things, you're going to be in this constant loop where we can feed you supplements, but it's going to be kind of like the same model as our healthcare system, where I'm just giving you something instead of actually teaching you the tools to like heal yourself, because you can't do one without the other. So a lot of this healing comes in like controlling lifestyle. And then also there's some specific different supplements and concoctions you can put in to help with like the mucus layer, help replenish the bacteria, help the leaky junctions become tight again. And there's even some stuff that you can do to kind of like calm the nervous system a little bit, or not the nervous system, the immune system a little bit, to kind of make it not so reactive. But that's a problem, in why like food sensitivities testing is like so big right now. But when you think about like why the immune system is reacting, then you can see that, okay, it's like not a problem with like our immune system or like the food, like you're saying. It's because like one of the things you've even kind of touched on, which is outside this talk, so I try to keep it as tight as possible. But like if you're not breaking down your food, and that starts in your mouth, and that starts in your stomach, and so there's a lot of I've realized working through this for so many years, I thought it was all about the microbiome when I started. And then I was like, okay, but we keep fixing the microbiome and it's not, staying fixed. And then so you start looking upstream and, we'll be here for hours if I go there. But yeah, that's the problem, is that we want to say that the food's a problem or the immune system's a problem, and it's not really the problem. Those are just kind of like innocent bystanders that are doing their jobs because other things aren't doing their jobs.
Yeah, really super interesting when you think about it that way. They're not the problem. It's whatever they're reacting to that they should not have to react to. So
Yeah.
you mentioned a little bit about supplements. I know one thing I've seen you post about is, ibuprofen, NSAIDs, those anti-inflammatories that we always pop like candy because it gets rid of your headache, and it's not that bad for you. And I feel
Yeah.
like most people, I think, probably recognize that a ton of Tylenol all the time is not the greatest for you. But I think the other ones, seem pretty innocent. But what can happen? I mean, is it bad to constantly be taking ibuprofen, Aleve, Advil to kind of get through things? I mean, is there any long-term effects of those anti-inflammatory drugs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So ironically enough, I actually have a background in musculoskeletal health. I'm a chiropractor by training, by school, but I actually work a lot in the soft tissue. So another whole other tangent that got me there with my own problems. But then I started diving into this stuff as my own, my mess became my message essentially. My own mess and my own problems came up, and no one was helping me. So we have a lot of experience with this because as a musculoskeletal doctor, people come in and they've been taking ibuprofen like for years. And the funny thing is that their doctors kind of okay this, like their primary care, their GP. Um, Although on the box, and it's very well documented in the literature, that you're not supposed to be taking ibuprofen for more than 10 days. So, that's an abuse of a pharmaceutical, and it's one of those things that's over the counter. And so I think people think that, oh, if it's over the counter, that it's not as bad. Sure, it might not be as bad as, an opioid overdose or something like that. You can certainly still overdose with NSAIDs or anti-inflammatories, but there's still a dangerous, and there's still a cost associated with taking these. And one of them is gut health. Like it actually can cause ibuprofen or NSAIDs in general are well known to cause ulcers in the stomach. So if you already have gut issues and then you're taking something that can perpetuate gut issues, big deal, like not good. Another thing is that it's really hard for our liver. Anything that we bring into our body has to detoxify through the liver. And so if you're constantly taking those, that's a lot of tax on your liver. And then finally, also on your kidneys, it's another detoxification organ that is going to excrete things on the other end. And it can take a lot of toll on your kidneys. So I wholeheartedly suggest that people avoid anti-inflammatories and NSAIDs at all costs. Another thing we see is people do like cortisone injections for joint pain. The problem with all these things is it doesn't actually fix the root cause. What you're doing, and again, is if you're fixing a symptom or you're stopping a symptom. It's a band-aid approach. It's not actually getting to what is going on. And we see a lot of my own clients too that we, work in the soft tissue in the office. We get really good range of motion and we're like, hey, you should be feeling really good. And they're like, I don't. And it's like, okay, well, that's coming from physiology. So it's really hard. It's multi-layered approach to understand where that inflammation is coming from, because sometimes it can just be where stuff is rubbing too close together and causing that like friction inflammation, which is going to be more the joint stuff. And then when that's fixed, then you have to start looking at, okay, like what's going on in the body that's perpetuating this. It's kind of like now another analogy for you. It's like if your smoke alarm is going off and you pop the battery out and you're like, okay, like great, I don't hear that anymore, but eventually your house is going to burn down. Same thing with any kind of over the counter NSAID or even steroids. Steroids have a lot of problems with them down the road too.
Yeah, silencing the symptom does not in any way fix the problem. That's really
Yeah,
good.
and unfortunately, that's kind of the same thing with food sensitivities. People are like, oh, I'll just take this food away for a little bit. And then they feel good. And then they're like, okay, like I'll bring it back. And they feel bad again. And I was in that same loop, that same cycle. And that's where it's like, it's just another version of it. Obviously, it's much healthier. But that's why people feel stuck. And also, I want to mention some natural anti-inflammatories. Curcumins had a big rise, or turmeric, however you want to pronounce it. Again, it's going to be kind of a band-aid effect where you don't want to be taking curcumin and turmeric every day. Your body actually will adapt to it. And, say like, okay, you keep feeding this to me, but that's not fixing the problem. Boswellia is another one that's really popular. Otherwise, like ice, water, hydration, and eating less inflammatory foods and avoiding toxins is probably going to be your best bet. Like you can't. Another really good quote I've heard, I can't remember off the top of my head what the Instagram account is, that you can't out medicate or out supplement a lifestyle based condition. It's one of those things where you kind of like lifestyle your way into it. It's really simple to believe that you can just medicate your way or supplement your way out of that problem.
Mhm. Yeah, so well, great. I'm glad that you mentioned the food and stuff because my next question is let's chat about food for a minute. So, what are some basic things that people are always buying at the grocery, look like they're healthy, but really, really should stay away from as far as reducing inflammation?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked this. I actually did some series like on the reels with like different versions. Like so the first one that comes to mind that I know I did was yogurt, and people are like, "Oh, yogurt!" And I love it because it's like gut health too. It has probiotics in it, natural probiotics. I'm like, you'll even say that has some probiotics in there on it, like Activia or something like that. The one that Jenny Lee Curtis was on, or Jamie Lee Curtis was on. Talking about if you just have like one of these every day for 14 days, you're gonna improve your gut. There's so much wrapped up in that, and it's just marketing crap. And so like that one, for instance, like you just have to look at dairy quality, probably not the best quality dairy. The probiotic amount that you're going to get in that is very, very, very small, and it's single strain. We have hundreds of thousands of different bacteria in our gut. So to believe again that like one little yogurt's gonna restore that is just it's a marketing scheme. Like it's not real. A lot of those yogurts are going to have extra sugar, not real fruit in them. So it's one of those things where you think you're doing yourself a favor, but you're really not. So like my hack for that is to buy Greek yogurt, which is going to have a higher protein content. It actually has more strains of more active cultures, and it should say that on there. And then you add your own fruit or honey or berries back to it. So you have control of not only the sugar content, but also like you're eating something that's a more higher protein. And it's you just have a lot more control over it. So that's I kind of like to do is like take some convenience foods. You can still have them be convenient. Like Greek yogurt is probably just as easy to pick up as the flavored yogurts. Have some frozen or fresh fruit, throw it in there, leave it in your fridge overnight, and now you have like the same thing, which is probably actually more economical and better for you. But I love taking things and making them like healthier, like either adding nutrients to them or taking some stuff out. It's actually like one of the things that gives me a lot of joy just in my own periphery, like taking things to family barbecues and I'm like, haha, this is healthier, and they don't even know it. And then people are like, oh, this is really good. I'm like, haha, it's healthy for you. Like it's like almost like a game for me that I trick people into it. But people are getting a lot better and they're getting wise to me. So now I have to, be a little sneakier about it, not so upfront. Off that tangent. So things that I think you should definitely stay away from are going to be like, this is a blanket statement. I know this one's hard, but processed foods in general, they just have a lot of additives in them. They have a lot of preservatives in them, which actually it's funny if you think about it. Preservatives are meant to keep bacteria out of foods. So it's to prevent spoilage, but also our guts are made of bacteria. So when you eat preservatives, you're literally like killing the gut bacteria. So I'm like, when I like thought about that, I'm like, holy cow, like duh. Like no wonder these things are so bad for us. But then you also have like food colorings and like stabilizers and just like so much stuff that like our bodies don't know and recognize, and it's just a lot for our GI tract. A lot of those foods are also like going to be high glycemic, so they're going to mess their blood sugar. They're going to be low fiber because they've taken and stripped the fiber out of them. Fiber is really important for our gut health. So it's just one of those things where processed foods just they're a treat. They shouldn't be part of your normal staple. And furthermore, they're full of seed oils typically, which is like canola oil, grapeseed oil, rapeseed oil, soybean oil, all these things that, and I can make like a list and send that to you too if people want to like, have a visual, because I do have a visual somewhere in my in all my slides and stuff. But we get tricked thinking that like some of these oils aren't that bad, but I've seen research results that we're trying to figure out why are we continuing to get like less healthy as like modern stuff continues, and they've corrected in these studies for like smoking, movement, sugar consumption, red meat consumption, because basically all these like attacks on egg consumption, all these attacks on foods over the last like 30, 40 years. And they found that we continue to get unhealthier at this steep incline. And the only thing that hasn't gone down is seed oils. So there's, it's one of those things, it's not causation, it's correlation, but they're correlating that the only thing that hasn't dropped in like the last 20 years in our lifestyle is these seed oils. They continue to perpetuate and go into more things, and our health continues to decline. So that's one of those things that's kind of new to me in the last couple of years. I knew it was a problem, but I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Sugar was the bad guy for a long time, and I still don't, I don't think you should be eating sugar like it's going out of style. But I also think people should not be afraid of fruit. As with most things, moderation. But yeah, I'm starting to realize how much seed oils are having an impact. And honestly, when I go to eat now, if I go out and I have something that's pretty greasy, that's been fried in a vat of oil that just keeps getting reheated and reheated, and it comes more rancid, I feel worse than like if I go eat something that has like a ton of gluten in or something like that. So even my own body, I'm starting to see that oil seems to be a bigger problem for me when I feel bad after eating something.
Yeah, and the oils, I did want to ask your opinion on some of the oils out there because I feel like, again, the marketing is so tricky and people have no idea what they're seeing. Because, like, I know you see these big, like, 8-cup containers of corn oil, and it says, it contains no cholesterol. It's like, well, duh, corn doesn't have cholesterol in it. Of course, corn oil is not going to have cholesterol in it. And, can heart healthy, can lower your cholesterol. And it's like, yeah, but that's not the whole picture. And if it's increasing inflammation, because corn oil and I think soybean oil too are highly inflammatory. Like it
Yeah.
might be reducing your cholesterol, but if it's skyrocketing your inflammation, it's not going to help you at all. So are there any, I feel like oils are just a huge thing that people can change pretty quickly and see, potentially some really good results. So are there any oils in your research and your experience that you really recommend people use more often?
Yeah, and the funny thing is that if you would have asked me this like 6 months, maybe a year ago, I'd have been like avocado oil hands down. But now I'm finding that a lot of avocado oil is actually being like I can't think of the word, but being like filtered in with other oils that are inflammatory, like I
Really
assume like
common.
vegetable oils. Yeah, like they're cutting them. That's the word. They're cutting them with things that aren't as healthy. Avocado oil, if it's pure, then yeah, that's still a good option. But that's where it gets really frustrating in these manufacturing processes. You have to buy from companies you know and trust. One of the companies that hasn't led me wrong yet, and this could always change tomorrow, is Primal Kitchen. They were unfortunately bought out by a bigger company, and I don't know which one of the big brand box, Nestle companies, which sadly happens a lot when these smaller companies want more reach in the market. So it's like a good and bad thing. It's a good thing because it gets more exposure to, and it gets further spread out among the population. But then you can take a brand like that, and when someone else is in charge of it, they start swapping in things, and you don't realize it until you start actually like paying attention. But as of 9/23/22, I still believe that Primal Kitchen is a pretty good source of good products, and they have an avocado oil that, as far as I know, is still pretty good. Olive oil is really good. Again, sourcing. This is a mixed bag. One of the things I read currently is someone was talking about how California olive oil is better than European because the standards are higher here. And I don't know, I've never heard that before. So you don't know what's hearsay. I do know that you want to have avocado oil that's extra virgin, so it's minimally processed. It means it's just like squeezed out versus there being some kind of processing, which is what happens with all the other vegetable oils, is that they're like squeezed out and they're like there's chemical solvents that are they're like mixed in to like pull out stuff so they don't stink as much. Like it's pretty nasty. I'll show you. I have a video from YouTube, not my own, but one that I showed some clients and they were like, what? So I'll have that if you want to share that in the notes too, just
Absolutely.
how chemical ridden the process is for vegetable oil. But back to olive oil, really good, heart healthy. The one thing that's again been the nuance is that people say that you shouldn't cook high heat with it because it will start to denature the antioxidants. I've seen recent research that says that the antioxidant level is so high that it can withstand higher heats. So again, olive oil, best to, I use it cold, so I use it in a lot of my salad dressings. So that's another thing that at the store, don't buy salad dressings unless they're that Primal Kitchen is like one of the only ones I'll buy pre-done, because they're full of canola oil or other oils, colorings, sugar, all that stuff. People think like they see light or, like simple ingredients. It's not true. Anything that has Kraft on it, just run away. But I make a lot of my own vinaigrettes, and I use olive oil as a base for those. So I'm getting a lot of olive oil in every day on top of greens and stuff like that. I also like coconut oil, although if sometimes if you have some gut issues with LPS, I'm not sure how much you guys are talking about like LPS and endotoxins. If you're having a lot of saturated fats and you already have an issue with LPS, that can be counterproductive. So again, use it gently, see how we react to it. Ghee is another staple that I use here. So even if you're dairy free, it has the dairy solids removed from it. So it's just the fat. So if you're not averse to animal proteins, then ghee is another great option. And then flaxseed oil is another really popular one. It's, well, not really popular one, less popular one, I should say. But it is to be used cold pressed as well. So you just want to use it in like salad dressings or as like some kind of finisher on top of like a piece of meat, etc. So those are the ones I have in my house. I'm like jogging through my brain: olive oil, avocado, ghee, coconut. And then I use my leftover bacon fat, like the lard that renders off when I make bacon. I use that for cooking too if I have it
Makes
around. So
great salad dressing.
yeah, yes. I actually just had a salad like that last week. That was really good. It was at a restaurant, so it probably wasn't as good for me, but um, you know, you gotta give and take.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, one last thing I want to pick your brain about. So you have a link for better wines. What is the problem? Why do people care about quality of wine that they're drinking?
So wine is apparently a pretty dirty industry as well. So it's one of those things where personally I was like, grapes, it's made from grapes, it's a ferment. Like, how can this be bad? But just like every other thing in the food industry, this is my frustration coming out, it has been manipulated and tiered with to make it cheap, easier to produce and more stable. And the problem is that trade-off means that we're taking a lot more crap in with our bodies. So, you know, wine, like I said, is a natural ferment, so it's probably the least processed form of alcohol in like a natural, like unadulterated with way. But again, we're not making our own wine for the most part. So there's a company that I really like. I have no affiliation with it. Do you mind if I share?
Go for it, yeah.
Yeah, it's called Scout and Cellar. And I don't even know how I wandered upon this on Instagram, like probably 3 or 4 years ago. But yeah, I really like their mission and I like their transparency. And so I'll kind of talk a little bit about like some of their tenants. And I mean, if other companies are doing this, like I will fully support them too. It's just this is the only company I know that is doing this stuff firsthand. So first of all, just like any other produce, you want to look at the grape quality. What are they being sprayed with? Herbicides, pesticides, that kind of stuff. Are they being harvested too early to create more yield? Because when grapes aren't allowed to go to their full ripen, then they're not going to be as sweet. Just like any other fruit, the longer it goes, the sweeter it is. Are they being grown too quickly? Are they like giving some kind of, I don't even know if this is a thing, but like are they giving something to like expedite the growth? I know that happens like with rotational crops, so I'm assuming that it can happen with grapes too. And so you have to look at what kind of grapes are being sourced. And again, that's going to be the company's responsibility, but the company should be very transparent and telling you what they're doing. And a lot of people are, a lot of companies aren't. And then next, if like any of the above is true, if they're not using these good farming practices, then they're gonna have to add stuff to the wine to make it palatable. Because if you have bitter grapes and you're pulling them off the vine too early, that's what your wine's gonna taste like. And nobody wants to drink that kind of wine. So then they add chemicals, additives, or sugar to it. And you're also going to be getting the chemical residue from pesticides and herbicides if they, the farming practices were skewed towards that. So there's sulfites, and that's another big thing with wine. Sulfites are added into wine. They are naturally occurring. It's actually like I think it's part of the fermentation process. And the wines to prevent oxidation and preserve freshness. And so it's kind of like the grapes and the wine knew to do that itself. But wine growers actually figured out like, oh, if we put more sulfites in it, it will, keep it fresher for longer. problem is that sulfites are really commonly associated with the headache that people get from wine. So I've been there before. When I actually just had a glass of wine probably 2 or 3 months ago, and I was like, oh my God, like I haven't had wine out at a restaurant for a really long time because I eat a lot at home because I just like to, have a quality control. And I live in a town of 14,000, so there's not too many tempting things to pull me out for. But I had a glass of wine and I was like immediate headache afterwards. And I'm like, man, I haven't had one of those wine headaches for a long time. But that's what you get sometimes when, you're eating out. And then lastly, so look for wines that don't have added sulfites in them across the board. If you can, it should say if they are adding sulfites or not. I believe that's part of the labeling process. You have to tell them if you're adding sulfites. So that's a problem with a lot of wine labels. They don't have a lot on them, so you don't really know what you're getting. And I think again, that's part of the concern with labeling is that these things aren't being required. So a lot of people aren't privy to them. They just think, oh, well, like wine, there's just grapes and a handful of things. And that's actually one of the things I just talked to Kelly, who is the girl who I learned about Scout and Cellar through. And she told me that starting right now or starting soon, they're actually going to be putting their labels, their ingredient labels on their wine, every single wine. So you know exactly what's in that wine. And I believe nutrition facts as well, at least a few of them. And that's not required of the industry. So this is one of those things where this company is going above and beyond to ensure that you understand what's going on in your wine and creating that transparency, which hopefully then, starts to shift the whole industry. So because transparency is beautiful. And companies that are doing good shouldn't be afraid of being transparent. I mean, across the board. And so and then lastly, they also test on the back end. So they test their products before they ship them out to ensure the quality and quantification of how much sugar, alcohol, sulfites, pesticides, and chemical additives are in their wine, meaning you will only be shipped a quality product. And again, that's one of those things that this isn't required. And I think that's a lot of the confusion around the food industry. And I do some stuff in the cosmetics and skincare. We think that the FDA is doing all this research and fact checking for us, and they're not. It's really bad. And so you have to be your own best advocate, and you have to do some of the research or find someone who's a nerd like me that enjoys researching these things and knowing them. So they can kind of decipher it and do some of that legwork for you and tell you about good companies and what to look for.
Yeah, and the other thing too that I realized, with alcohol in general, is that there is no label on it. You have no idea what's in there. It can be
Yeah,
a peach flavor, a white or peach flavored white wine or something, but you have no idea what that peach flavor came from or even the quality of, yeah, the wine or anything. It could just be all a whole bunch of natural flavors that makes it taste like peach wine. Like you have no
yeah,
idea what you're getting.
yep.
And but on the back to the olive oil thing real quick. So
Mhm.
I went on a ridiculous research several years ago because I would find myself literally staring there at this wall of all these olive oils. Like, okay, what I have no idea what to do. It was a paralyzing, oh my gosh, this one's $10, this one's $25, this one's
Right.
$4. They all look exactly the same. So what I did realize was that when you're talking about California versus Europe, is there is a company that has a California seal of it's been inspected. And there are very few olive oils that have that seal on there. So I have bought some of those before as far as inspection purposes. But also if you flip it over and there is no harvest date or a batch date, it means that it's a combination of a whole bunch of oils. And they can't put a harvest date because it was all harvested at different times. So just a couple interesting nuggets there. But yeah, the oil industry in general is just, it's crazy. Super
Yeah, it is
corrupt. There's
bonkers.
lots of whatever we can do to make more money.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you start to investigate a lot of things that you think the government is, has their hands on for the betterment of the people, you start to realize that we're in this alone, and sadly. Another thing that with a lot of olive oil, that's one of those things where if you can't find a seal, a lot of times if they're in tin or glass, they're going to be a higher quality. That's part of it could be a marketing thing, but a lot of companies that actually care about their olive oil will be putting it in opaque things because light is oxidizing. So light will take those antioxidants and start to diminish them. So, and then obviously there's going to be phthalates coming from plastic. So if it's in a plastic bottle, probably not the highest quality or could have some contamination in it. So always look for opaque glass or tin, as well as the batch date, like you're saying. A harvest date is another good one where you can kind of trace it. And some of the companies, like the one I have right now, I can't even think of what it is. It's from Costco, but it's a Tanzanian company and it's in these big yellow tins. And you can actually source to the vineyard, where it came from, stuff like
Oh,
that.
cool.
So it gives me a little more peace of mind. Again, like it's one of those things that sometimes I kind of just feel like it's a crapshoot, just like everything else. Like I do the best I can. And
Yeah.
also like that's one of those things too where sometimes you just have to do the best you can and let it be. If you are constantly like worried about everything, that stress component can take over. And then like you're trying to do something healthy for yourself and it's not actually healthy because you're so stressed about what your decision is going to be. So sometimes it's like make the decision, roll with it, and then if you find something better in the future, you'll learn. Like that's part of the process, unfortunately.
And yeah, and focusing, what is worth your time. Maybe start with what you eat
Yeah.
most often, what you're always consuming, and start to make that better. And then just kind of, yeah, work it out from there. So let's talk really quick about your free inflammation quiz that we have available for everybody. So, what can our viewers learn from that? What's that going to tell them?
So I created this because people didn't really understand like what inflammation is, how it's showing up in their bodies, and so it's just like a basically a symptom assessment. And you kind of tell me about, not me, but you tell the computer, the AI, about all your symptoms, and it will put you into the one of three levels to basically tell or let you know how much inflammation is going on underneath. So like for me, I didn't think I had that inflammation until I started having eczema, and I'm like, oh, eczema is inflammatory. And some people don't still kind of make that connection because the dermatologist or your GP who you're going to see for eczema is not going to say this is coming from inflammation. They're just going to be like, here's a steroid. There you go. And so you don't even realize it. But there's so many things like autoimmunity, anything that ends in itis. You get tendonitis, you have dermatitis, like anything that's itis, ending in itis, is going to be that inflammation, um, you know, root. And so it's just like a big assessment. It goes through like all the body systems. So you can kind of see how much inflammation is going on across your body.
That's super cool
Yeah.
and really, really informative because, yeah, there's some obvious places where it's probably inflammation, but there's so many hidden places where you don't realize that's where it's coming from.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much. This was super informative and just really an interesting deep dive into the world of inflammation and how it really affects everything in your body. It's kind of crazy. And how,
Yeah.
and the gut also kind of affects everything in your body. So when you're dealing with
Yes.
one, you're probably dealing with the other. And there's lots of ways to still work on it, still fix it. You're never too far gone to start getting better.
That's totally true. And that's why I know this is a lot of information overload, but hopefully it's empowering versus feeling like overwhelming. Because I felt really overwhelmed in the beginning. And so just take the next step forward. Like if that next step is finding like an olive oil that has like sourcing and a production date on it and is in glass, awesome. That's a win for the day. So remember that like you don't have to do it all at once. Otherwise it is going to become overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people learn more about you?
So if you go ahead and check out the quiz, the freebie quiz, that's a good place. It will kind of put you on my email list. And then also I hang out on Instagram a lot. It's Dr. Dr. period Dani Dani dot Homer Hommer.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And guys, stay tuned for tomorrow. We're going to have some more awesome information for you guys.